In this video, I'm going to show you how to place the parking brake shoes on this Subaru Crosstrek. They're located behind your rear rotor, so we'll have to take the brakes apart, so let's get started. Let's remove the wheel. Use a 19mm socket, remove all 5 lug nuts, and then pull the wheel off. From the back side, you'll see 2 17mm bolts holding the caliper and bracket assembly with the pads onto the knuckle. Let's remove the entire assembly, set it aside, because we don't need to disassemble this if we're doing parking brake shoes. We just need to get it out of the way so the rotor can pull off. These are fairly tight, so get something that will provide some leverage, break them free. And before I remove this one completely, I'm going to go up to this top one and remove this one. With both bolts out of here, pull the caliper off the rotor and set it up on top of the upper control arm. You don't want to put pressure on the brake hose by letting this hang. Now remove the rotor. If it's stuck, it could be seized on the hub, or of course make sure your parking brake is not engaged, because then that's going to hold the rotor completely stuck on here without it being seized. So mine moves freely. I'm going to remove that. I will give them a quick cleaning with brake parts cleaner to remove all the dust. Before I clean those, I'm also going to take a look at the hub. This one looks like it's actually been recently replaced, so there's no rust on it. It's actually still painted from the factory. There's just a little bit of anti-seize, which I'm going to just use a wire brush to get off of here, or at least as much as I can. And then I will just use brake parts cleaner to do the rest. It's going to melt it off. Now, if yours had rust, you're going to want to use a wire brush. If it's light, if it's severe, you're going to want to use some sandpaper or a sanding disc to get it nice and clean. You don't want a lot of rot buildup here because the rotor won't sit flat. And if it doesn't sit flat, you'll have braking issues, and you don't want your brake pedal pulsating just because of this. Of course, the wheel isn't going to sit perfectly flat on that either. So I'm going to put a collection bucket underneath, rinse everything, including the shoes and the hub, with brake parts cleaner, get it all cleaned up, and then we'll go from there. From underneath the parking brake shoes, you'll see that there's a lower spring here, and right behind it is the adjuster. I'm going to use a little pry bar and compress the shoes together. That means spinning the adjuster, and for me, I have to pull towards the outside from the bottom. If this was installed the other way around, which really there is no direction for this, then you're going to have to push to squeeze them together. And that just bottomed out completely. So this allows me to compress the pads a little bit closer. That's going to make it easier to remove everything. Now to remove this lower spring, because it's a very light spring and there really isn't much pressure on it, I'm just going to take some needle nose pliers and try to pry it out of its spot. If you have needle nose locking pliers, that actually might also work in your favor, because you can lock onto the spring and not worry about having to squeeze it. But looks like regular needle nose works for me. So now I'm going to take the spring off of this side. I will inspect all the hardware that I'm removing, and I will be reusing it. It is in good condition, but if yours is in poor condition, replace it. To take the adjuster out, all you have to do is push these shoes apart, and there it is. Make sure that this spins freely. If it doesn't spin, and if it's seized, this is the non-threaded part of it, and I'll show you how to clean that in a second, and this is the threaded part. Make sure that the adjuster spins freely on both ends. In most cases, these are going to be okay. If it's seized, you're going to have to unseize it and lubricate it, or purchase a new one. The springs at the top are small. They are a little bit stronger than the lower springs, so to take these out, you can either use some needle nose pliers, locking pliers if you have them, or a flathead like this, and just pry it right off. The last thing holding this shoe on is going to be this spring retainer with the pin. All you have to do is press in on the spring and the pin should be able to twist. Now if there's pressure sideways on this shoe, it's not going to want to twist very nicely. So I'll try to move this around to where you have a decent spot to press on. The pin will be accessible from the back side, and as soon as you press on this, try to twist it. You might also find that pressing with one tool and using needle nose pliers to twist the pin is also a very good way to take this out. Just be careful not to twist the head of the pin off, which can break easily because then you'll need to buy a new one. Now you can remove this, remove the shoe, and remove the pin from the back side. Of course, inspect it. This one's rusty, but still reusable. If it was completely rotted away or broken, of course, then I would replace it. This area is fairly clean. If it had a lot of rust, you'd want to use a wire brush. But there's 3 main spots where the parking brake shoes touch the backing shield, and of course this pivot point at the top. I'm going to quickly wire brush all these just to make sure there's no debris stuck here, which there isn't. And now I'm going to apply a little bit of silicone paste, which is rated for high temperatures. It is made for brakes. Just a tiny bit. You don't need a lot. You just want it to coat it so that they don't squeak when you apply the parking brake. Otherwise, it will basically grind metal to metal and could cause a squeak. I'm also going to put a little bit right up here on this pivot point. Now we can get the shoe installed, and all the shoes are the same on this. They are not different front to back or left and right. And I'm going to take the shoe, slide it over right here, and I have my pin ready. There we go. Get that pin through. And take whatever tool you were using earlier that worked for you. Press this in and twist it if you can in one go. Usually that doesn't happen and you'll struggle for a while, and then just correct the pin so that it's actually centered. Bring this facing down. Just like it was before. Everything is in position. So this shoe is replaced. Let's do the same on the other side with the other shoe. The spring on the top, you'll notice that it has one end that hooks and points away from the spring, and the other side is more in line with the spring. You want the side that hooks away going onto the shoe, and you want it right in that cutout at the top right there. So not any of these round holes. That's not where the spring goes. And I'm just going to take my screwdriver, hook it through the other side, bring it right over. Now we have to replace the other side shoe, and this rear facing shoe is actually the one that has the parking brake lever attached to it on the back side. So there's going to be a couple more pieces to replace here than just the shoe itself, but the procedure to removing it is about the same. So since the bottom is already loose, I'm going to start at the top, take this spring out, then the pin and the spring retainer, and then of course the shoe itself. This pin is curved, has a little curve in it that's normal. That's what you want so that this actually clears the parking brake lever when it sits in there. So if you take both out at the same time, make sure you don't confuse them. And now this is going to be attached. So we're going to have to take this off. As you can see, if you just pull on that, this twists away. And this spring does look similar to that top one, but of course it's not the same, so don't confuse them. I like to keep this spring hooked onto this piece so that it actually stays together the way it's meant to be. Next, what we'll need to do is remove this horseshoe clip that holds the lever onto the shoe. The best way to do this, to begin at least, is with some pliers, and you'll see what I'm about to do, and that is to try to squish it outward. That's going to spread the ends of the pin or the clip over the pin and slide it out. From there you can take it with a screwdriver and continue prying it away. The only other good way to do this is if you have something that'll get in here and actually spread these apart, but as you can see, if you try to do that, it'll just spin. So the pliers are going to be the best way to go for now. Once you have it about this far, you can either continue grabbing it with the pliers and try to pry it out of here, or if you have a little screwdriver that can get behind it and continue prying it. Honestly, whatever works and whatever gets it out of here. There it is. Now you'll be able to push the pin out or pull the lever off the pin, I should say. There's also a little spring washer that sits in there. Don't lose that. Take that lever off, and here's your shoe. The pin does come off of the shoe, although we do have a new one. I'm going to set this aside, and there's the shoe. Now you want to take the new pin, slide it through the shoe, just like this, and I like to put a little bit of grease in there just so this can slide smoothly, and then put the lever in. Now I know there's no spring washer. In this case, the spring washer doesn't fit, so I'm just going to use the horseshoe clip. Slide this right over, just like that. Turn it so you can grab it with the pliers and squeeze it shut, just like that. That's going to lock it in nice and tight. Everything operates smoothly, and there's even a little bit of wiggle room, just enough for this to not bind up. Now let's just grease up the pivot points, or the contact points I should say, of this shoe. We're going to reinstall this and then put it all back together. And just like on the other side, the spring at the top has one part that hooks away from the spring and another one that hooks into the spring. Make sure you put it on the right way. Wipe the grease off of this and add some new grease. I did, so I'm just going to work it around in here. And then I'm going to do the same on this side. I'm going to unthread the adjuster all the way. If it needs to be cleaned up with a wire brush or some brake parts cleaner, go ahead and do that. If not, I'm just going to add a little bit of grease to the threads, then thread it all the way back down in to work it in. I added some grease. I'm going to thread this all the way in. You really don't need a lot. If you put too much, it'll just kind of squeeze out as you thread it in, and then you'll have to wipe it off. So just put a little bit, enough to coat the threads. That should be plenty. Any excess, remove it. And I personally like to put just a tiny bit of grease right on the ends here. That way it prevents it from seizing or potentially squeaking. Get the adjuster in. I'm going to put it on the same way or the same direction that it was in before. That way it is as the factory intended it to be, especially if you're used to working on the vehicle with it in one direction. That way you don't have to spin it the other way. And of course the spring at the bottom. Hook it on. Okay, let's get the rotor on and adjust the shoes. Now take the rotor and slide it back over the hub, and let's double check what the parking brake shoes sound like so that we can make sure they're adjusted properly. Keep pressure on the rotor. I actually hear nothing, which is not a good thing. You do want to hear them just barely touch. So I'm going to pull this back off, expand them a little bit, adjust them so that they're closer to the rotor. We'll check again after that. Spin this adjuster to apply tension to the shoes or expand them. A little bit goes a long way, so I'm just going to do this. Try again. All right, let's try again. All right. You can hear how they're just barely touching. There's no drag on here. It's not slowing me down. And then they kind of disappear and come back. That's what you want out of parking brake shoes. You don't want them to continuously drag like drum brakes, but you do want them to be very close. Otherwise, your parking brake lever is going to go all the way up and potentially not even hold the vehicle in place. Now remove the rotor. Apply a thin layer of anti-seize to the surface of the hub. You don't need a lot. If you put too much, it'll start flinging out as you drive. You just want to prevent corrosion. I know this hub still has some paint on it, but I still like to add this anti-corrosive coating. It'll also prevent the rotor from seizing onto the hub or building up rust to the point where it swells up. And if it swells up, it'll push off the hub and it's not going to sit flat anymore. Once again, a nice thin layer all around will do the trick. Now take the rotor and slide it back over the hub. Now bring the caliper back over the rotor. Everything should fit nicely. Start the bolts in by hand, making sure they don't cross thread into the bracket. Let's bottom them out and then we'll snug them. The torque on these is 81 foot-pounds. Let's get the wheel back on. Start on all 5 lug nuts, bottom them out in a cross pattern, and also in a cross pattern, torque them to 89 foot-pounds. Once again, 89 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Double check them. At this point, you can do the same to the other side. Pump up that brake pedal, top off the master cylinder, and take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.